The Pajero engines are specific, but there are no obvious shortcomings here, unless there is an excessive number of frankly outdated solutions. The enormous safety margin of the cooling system and maximum conductivity are balanced by the low quality of some materials. In addition, blatant disregard for operating rules leads to breakdowns. The number of gasoline engines is approximately equally distributed between variants with 3.0 and 3.8-liter engines, but 3.5 engines are extremely rare. Engines of the 6G72 and 6G75 families in 178 and 247 horsepower versions are common on our market. The power varies depending on the version. Engine 6G74 with a volume of 3.5 liters and 188 horsepower, it is unrealistic to find, but there is no particular need for it. It is no different from the other two, except for volume. All engines belong to the 6G7 family in the version with one camshaft, SOHC, and 24 valves, with distributed injection. The engines are very old. In the article about the second generation of the model you will find essentially the same engines with differences in the nuances, injection systems, intake manifolds, and so on. They tried to install GDI engines on the third generation Pajero, but they turned out to be extremely unpopular. But the Montero had exactly the same SOC MPI version 6G7, and they performed excellently. Hey buddy, looking for a used car? You should pay attention to the site Carmi.pro. Carmi.pro is huge catalog of cars, engines, gearboxes, and the best part is, you can find out about breakdowns of any part of any car, absolutely free. Go on Carmi.pro and be aware of all possible malfunctions. Carmi.pro. Actually, the engines don't have many serious shortcomings. First of all, this is gluttony and complicated hydraulic timing belt tensioners, which behave poorly in cold weather. The hydraulic compensators are very delicate and the hydraulic compensator cups are weak. These motors are not very convenient to maintain, but there are no complaints about the service life. If the power and lubrication system is in good working order, then the piston and crankshaft will easily reach 500,000 kilometers or even a million. It all depends on how the car is looked after. Motors are willing to tolerate mild overheating and cheap oils, but do not like poor antifreeze, insufficient oil levels, and low viscosity. And in general, they are demanding on the condition of attachments, numerous external pipes of the lubrication system, and crankcase ventilation. There is a small chance of cylinder head cracks, broken tensioner pins, and early wear of the oil pump with a drop in oil pressure, but this happens so rarely that most owners are not aware of typical faults. Slightly inflated prices for consumables and spare parts do not please owners of old cars, but used engines themselves and automatic transmissions, by the way, are cheap, so the neglected condition of the engine is not a death sentence. Often, even with relatively minor problems, it is cheaper to simply replace it. Many cars are equipped with gas equipment. This is facilitated by consumption. But these engines are relatively poorly suited to running on liquefied gas. They are very low powered, and the control system cannot take advantage of the gas's octane number advantages. But the valves, despite the hydraulic compensators, wear out much faster, and the seats also sag. The main diesel engine in this generation is the 4M41, which is a development of the 2.8 series 4M40 engine line. This is a 16-valve inline-4 with a volume of 3.2 liters. Essentially a truck power unit, but it is equipped with balancer shafts and surprisingly lacks vibrations in good condition. In this generation, the very problematic Zexel fuel injection pump was finally replaced with common rail injection, but cars for Asian markets could be found with Zexel until 2009, when this unsuccessful line was completely discontinued. The Denso pump, of course, is not cheap, and the system is sensitive to the quality of diesel fuel, but it is easy to repair, and there are plenty of used Denso injection pumps. The injectors are capricious compared to Bosch, but if you compare them with the old fuel equipment, they are ideal. Motor options of different power, from 163 to 200 horsepower, in practice do not differ in terms of service life. But the 2.84M40 series engine, which is also occasionally found on this generation, is still equipped with Zexel. So we would not recommend buying cars with a 2.8 diesel engine, especially since the price is unlikely to differ from the 3.2. There are plenty of problems besides fuel equipment. The most common problem is a dead crankshaft damper and associated pump jams and leaks. Cracks in the cylinder head are typical for the entire line of Mitsubishi diesel engines, and the 4M41 is no exception. The problem is often confused with a broken gasket, which is also a typical problem, but when purchasing, you should do a leak test and assume the worst. Especially given the fact that cylinder heads are in short supply and are almost never repaired. Broken camshafts and beds are also a typical phenomenon. The engine is not equipped with hydraulic compensators, and adjustments are often forgotten. And you can't tell from the sound what it is, just rough engine operation or incorrect clearances. The timing chain is not as reliable as Ziguli owners think. Chains break at high mileage, and replacement costs are high, although chains have been learned to be changed by pulling, and camshaft sprockets are easy to replace. In general, you can count on 200,000 kilometers of chain life, but since the moment of break is difficult to catch by some noise, it is better to change the chain preventively and sometimes open the engine to assess the condition of the tensioner and dampers. The EGR system with a heat exchanger and particulate filter in engines of cars for the European market are a traditional weak point. Even water hammers occur due to leaks. In general, this generation of engines is quite successful. The main problem with the injection pump has been solved. The simple maintenance of the inline 4, albeit of a large volume, is also captivating. The only pity is that the price of a number of spare parts is very high. So, replacing a cylinder head can easily empty the owner's pocket by 200,000 rubles, but there is always a chance to find a still living used motor for half this amount. It would seem that on a large Japanese car the braking system should not cause any trouble. In practice, the Pajero brakes have been a complete weak point since the third generation. The large front discs are quite reliable as long as you don't overheat and don't roll through puddles. But two-piston calipers with a floating caliper are quite troublesome. Dirt collects inside and is not washed out. As a result, the pistons jam and the pads become warped. The bracket is also unsuccessful, it warps in the guides. Off-road driving makes everything worse. Calipers do not tolerate dirt well, it gets under the boots of the pistons and guides. The rear calipers are a little simpler, but they don't like mud baths either. In addition, the brake system pipes, which lack corrosion protection, rot. Thank goodness for the fact that the parking brake mechanism is simple and successful, with a drum mechanism. The biggest surprise comes from ABS. Many owners don't realize that it's not just that they don't see a vacuum booster under the hood, it's not there. The car uses an electro-hydraulic brake drive, and the pedal does not have a direct connection with the wheel brake cylinders. With age, pump motor and accumulator failures begin. Everything gets worse if the brake fluid has not been changed for a long time or the car has been bathed. Checking the functionality of the ABS must be carried out without fail, and any uneven braking or poor release of the brakes is a reason to reduce the price by the amount of serious repairs to the brake system. Considering that the third generation Pajero had the same system and today there is a lot of trouble with it, we can confidently say that this will soon become the main serious malfunction of the fourth generation car. With the suspension, everything is also ambiguous. Double wishbones are used here at the front and a multi-link at the rear. Ball joints are replaceable everywhere, as are silent blocks. It would seem that everything is simple and reliable. But the resource greatly depends on where the car is driven and how it is maintained. In city mode and with the annual stretching of silent blocks, the service life is really good. The first repairs of levers and ball joints begin far beyond 150,000 kilometers. But even rare off-road trips, installation of wheels with a non-standard offset and lack of regular maintenance reduce the service life of all elements significantly. Hey buddy, looking for a used car? You should pay attention to the site Carmi.pro. Carmi.pro is huge catalog of cars, engines, gearboxes, and the best part is, you can find out about breakdowns of any part of any car, absolutely free. Go on Carmi.pro and be aware of all possible malfunctions. Carmi.pro. After relatively short runs, shock absorbers tend to transfer small irregularities to the body, and if off-road tires with developed lugs are installed, then driving the car becomes surprisingly uncomfortable. However, this can be fixed, selecting non-original springs and shock absorbers, installing soft shock absorber bushings every 2 to 3 years, and the level of comfort returns to acceptable. The anti-roll bar bushings and wheel bearings, even during city use, require replacement after 50,000 kilometers, and the springs can die before the same mileage. Wheel bearings on Pajero are replaced only as an assembly with the hub, and this is an expensive unit. The front ones cost from 7 to 22,000 rubles, the rear ones are a little cheaper. But the surprise is that it is difficult to buy something decent from trusted bearing manufacturers. At best, it will be a second-tier name or a budget option from top brands. As a result, purchases and replacements of bearings begin at almost every second maintenance. Let's add here the studs, which regularly burst at the slightest tightening, and in the end it turns out that there is a lot of hassle with the suspension. Once every 3 years you will have to spend a lot on repairs. The steering rack knocks on most cars. The service life of the rods and ends is short, and there are also added backlashes and knocks from the cart-end shafts and a broken steering column. In principle, the rack, with mileage up to 200,000 in the absence of serious off-road driving, mainly requires the installation of fluoroplastic bushings. The system actively flows through seals and tube rolling on machines older than 10 years. It is dangerous to miss the oil level, since the power steering pumps here are original, and on the diesel version with a 4M41 series engine, the pump is very specific and rare. It is easier to repair it than to find a used one, but the price of a repair kit starts from 15,000 rubles. Pajero has a complex multi-mode Super Select 2 transmission with a center differential, center lock and reduction gear. In some versions, the car was also equipped with a rear differential lock. However, the versions for Asian countries had strange configurations. If you got such a Pajero, then it may turn out to be without a Super Select, but with a rigidly connected front axle. In any case, the system has many shafts, splines, CV joints and cart ends, and depending on the loads and operating conditions, their service life varies widely. Cars with a 6-speed manual transmission are quite common. This is the V5 M31E X5 gearbox in different versions. It was standardly installed with diesel engines, but off-road enthusiasts pair it with gasoline engines, although such options were not offered standardly. This is a fairly strong and at the same time cheap manual transmission, which breaks down mainly due to gross operating errors or very high mileage. It is quite reparable, but the price of disassembled versions is so ridiculous that it is cheaper to buy a working used one. The clutch life is sometimes low, but a lot depends on the driver and operating conditions. Automatic transmissions on this generation are 4 or 5-speed. With a 3.0 petrol engine, they installed a 4-speed V4A5A7, another designation V4A51, with a 3.2 diesel engine, a 5-speed V5AWFK. With 3.8 petrol engines, there were variants of the 5-speed V5A5A7, aka V5A51. It is curious that all the boxes here are of our own production, except for the V5AWFK. This is an Aisin A750F unit. And although all gearboxes are quite strong, Aisin is still more reliable than the 5-speed gearbox produced by Mitsubishi. Its peculiarity is the need to monitor the condition of the solenoids and sensitivity to contamination. The native 4 and 5-speed gearboxes have a rather weak rear gear, which is unpleasant for an SUV. In addition, boxes filled with water are regularly encountered. If the car has wet floors and the gearbox is not behaving very well, then chances are high that it will soon stop due to wet clutches. The resource problems of these automatic transmissions are described in the article about the third-generation Pajero, where they appear in more contrast. The most durable and trouble-free is the 4-speed V4A5A7, but don't expect any dynamics or low fuel consumption with it. The main problem with gearboxes produced by Mitsubishi is the breakdown of the selector contact group, which is located directly on the box. And here, too, moisture is to blame for everything. It gets on the contact group, and the electronics cease to understand which mode is on, which leads to a transition to emergency mode. The transfer case is quite reliable if oil does not leak out of it and water does not flow into it, then mechanical problems are unlikely. However, on cars with literally hundreds of miles, position sensors and all the pneumatics of switches with filters cause a lot of headaches. A specialized service knows which filters need to be changed and where the tubes are cracking, but for a standard general service, all problems will be a real mystery. Severe Pajero drivers even bring duplicate contacts from the transfer case shift drive motor into the cabin, so as not to get stuck in deep mud with front-wheel drive, locking or lowering not connecting. Hey buddy, looking for a used car? You should pay attention to the site Carmi.pro. Carmi.pro is huge catalog of cars, engines, gearboxes, and the best part is, you can find out about breakdowns of any part of any car, absolutely free. Go on Carmi.pro and be aware of all possible malfunctions. Carmi.pro. A close inspection of the Pajero is a must. Mitsubishi paints its expensive SUVs little better than its budget models. After only 5 years of operation, you can find bugs on the outer panels without looking closely, especially if the car is operated in Moscow or St. Petersburg. And older examples may easily lack sills and door bottoms, and there is corrosion on the windshield frame, side and rear doors, and moldings. Do not neglect inspecting the roof, especially if there is a hatch and roof rails, and in the spoiler area. And look carefully at the junction of metal and plastic on the fenders and on the rear door. On 5-door cars, a typical place for corrosion is the rear arch. Moisture accumulates where the door meets and the edge of the arch rots. 3-door cars do not have this problem, but the part of the wing behind the door is heavily sandblasted. The windshield frame of cars older than 10 years must be inspected not only from above, where chips remain above the glass, but also along the side pillars and in the recess under the molding. There are cars where the frame is not sealed because it's simply rotted. By the way, the seams of the roof, hidden in the boxes, swelled. The roof drainage box is usually full of dirt, and in winter it all freezes and damages the paint. In general, even the presence of beetles and a rusty gate is not a death sentence for the body, but the price of the work will be substantial, and high-quality removal will require donor spare parts. Well, specimens that are badly neglected on the outside almost certainly have many internal surprises. Even if the car looks good at first glance, it is necessary to inspect it from below and on a lift. After all, even a 5-year-old Pajero may have holes in the sills, especially if the car was imported from somewhere in the Emirates and operated in Moscow. The architecture of the body implies an inverted threshold when the floor is higher than the level of the power elements. In this option, it is the threshold itself and its amplifier, as the lowest located parts of the car, that suffer from corrosion and impacts. Moreover, on the inside of the threshold there are reinforcement patches, the seams of which are not sealed, and the plugs in the threshold amplifier are often lost. The brackets welded between the side member and the threshold amplifier, on which the step is suspended, rust first and often serve as a catalyst for problems in this area. The second stage of the disease is corrosion of the threshold amplifier. This is a thing made of thick metal with round windows. When the threshold bends, it becomes visible from both sides. However, replacing all this is still relatively inexpensive and not very difficult. It's worse when the floor spars begin to rot, since structurally it's more of a frame welded to the body from below. Corrosion of the side members, even at the initial stage, at the seams and the junction with the threshold amplifier, is already a sure sign that the repair will be large-scale, with the removal of floors and joints. Floors mostly rot from the inside due to windshield leaks or off-road driving in deep water. Corrosion on the floors above the fuel tank is usually worse than on the rest of the bottom, so pay attention to whether anti-corrosion treatment has been done in this area. Along the way, the corners of the wheel arches also rot. In this case, it makes sense to think about whether you need such a car. Such defects certainly cannot be eliminated on a budget, and repairs may not be enough for a long time. In wheel arches, corrosion usually does not appear fatal, but the thick metal of the side members and structural members at the bottom of the arches usually has deep corrosion damage and is not ideally reparable. High-quality cleaning will prolong the agony, but how long the coating will last is a big question. The outer edge of the arch itself is well covered with plastic, and if you change the standard rubber seal in time, then almost no sand gets there. And the most problematic element is the plastic extender amplifier. It, like the bumper amplifiers, is made of cheap steel and painted very lightly. Fortunately, this part is replaceable. The bumper reinforcements are also easy to change, but the first to rust is the rear one, which is simply coated with primer from the factory. The outside of the wings will be in good condition if the plastic was not removed completely, but the car was washed thoroughly. Or, after removing the plastic, they replaced the fasteners with new ones and did everything carefully and conscientiously. But the inner edge of the arch can rot, since it is not solid, but with plastic fasteners. In addition, the front fender rots from the inside in the contact area with the sill due to dirt accumulating behind the locker. Inside the body, first of all, pay attention to whether there is moisture on the carpets and in the luggage compartment niche and whether the seat brackets are corroding. There may be many sources of water, but in any case, if these are not the consequences of recent dry cleaning, such a car will cause a lot of trouble both in terms of the body and electrical parts. The saddest thing is if water appears in the cabin due to corrosion of the windshield frame, roof or roof rail mounts, or a poor rear door seal. Through weak seals on the side doors and window moldings, moisture also gets onto the floors, but in a smaller volume. A faulty hatch is a problem for the Pajero, the drain here gets clogged easily, and the seals are not very good. In general, the purchase recommendations are standard, a careful inspection from all sides and on a lift in good lighting. However, if you buy a Pajero in a region where there is no salt in winter and little rain in summer, then the body may be in excellent condition, including underneath. But there are few such copies, and their prices, of course, are steep. The quality of body parts, alas, is poor. In the best years, the fasteners were more reliable, the plastic was softer, and the chrome did not peel off for years. There are more complaints about relatively new cars, but only minor ones. In general, this is still a Japanese assembly, and besides, the Pajero is initially strong and tenacious. Most owners do not encounter unexpected breakdowns. Typical complaints include fading headlights, even those without lenses. The reflectors turn yellow, and they also rub well. The taillights are fragile. For a regular car, this is not a problem, but on an SUV it is unpleasant. The windows are soft, and stones fly into them, especially into the windshield, regularly. The windshield wiper trapeze is loose at 200,000 mileage. The sill trims move away and collect dirt underneath, causing corrosion. The door seals are extremely delicate, and at the slightest violation, water flows from the doors into the interior. And after the first restyling, a lot of dirt gets into the doors, since the quality of the glass moldings has decreased. The rear door seals are mediocre, but the quality of the hinges also affects them. They sag over 1,500,000 miles. The locks freeze, more so on new cars. Their larvae often just turn sour. Jamming of the ignition switch is often found on cars produced in 2015 to 2016. Vibrations of the mirrors are a sign of rather harsh off-road use and the presence of an almost truck-like diesel engine under the hood. But the fact that the mirror elements crack in winter is most likely a factory defect. Weak door stops are typical for the Japanese, but they can be sorted out with crackers from Kalina. I know, readers are always pleased with VAZ spare parts in a foreign car, or supplied from the Lexus GS of the generation before last. Both of them are stronger. The steel fuel tank corrodes and leaks. Fortunately, there are tuning aluminum ones from Nizhny Novgorod, as well as plastic Chinese ones. Most of the problems with plastic and uneven gaps can be attributed to off-road use. The Pajero is not a car that is bought to drive only on asphalt. But still, it is made too formal to endure such rides without consequences at all. The Pajero has a quite pleasant interior, and the materials are quite good, almost comparable to European cars. But here's the problem: the front panel hangs so loose that on dirt roads it seems like it's about to be torn off. Experienced pager builders have even developed a strengthening technique that involves installing metal corner reinforcements and tightening panel parts with clamps. The most meticulous ones cover the joints with Mataline and glue them. After the second restyling, the panel was made stronger. It is rarely reinforced anymore. This operation is not only labor-intensive, but also significantly injures the components, so broken deflector latches after bulkheads are common. Door trims, by the way, also creak when hung diagonally and during strong shaking, so sometimes they are also glued. Usually, all events of this kind are carried out after installing additional sound insulation. Initially, the car is not the quietest, and after gluing the floors and arches, the rattling of the front panel and door cards begins to irritate the owners. Another minor annoyance worth noting is the school lighting on the bulbs. After 10 years of operation, they have to be replaced, often with associated damage to the panels. The most unpleasant moments are related to the operation of the climate system. In general, the Pajero is quite warm and well suited for use even in Siberia, which is why they love it there. But with mileage, several nuances appear at once. The hoses for the rear interior heater and rear air conditioner rot after 5 years of use. It's good that metal, plastic, and flexible hose kits are made ready-made bolt-on. For some reason, the front heater radiator in diesel cars often gets dirty. Apparently, the antifreeze gets oily. Some specialized services even offer a washing and degreasing procedure. It is difficult to make generalizations regarding the wear and tear of the interior, but experience shows that with mileage exceeding 250,000 in normal suburban use, the fabric interior is preserved perfectly, subject to regular dry cleaning. In leather-on models, wrinkles in the side part of the driver's seat cushion are already difficult to eliminate. After such a mileage, the side bolster gets dented. On the steering wheel, wear is noticeable due to changes in texture, but even after 250,000 kilometers it is quite alive. Lever linings usually experience minimal wear. There is almost no wear on the buttons. They initially have a simple texture. Usually the only thing that gets scratched is the silver on the center console trim near the automatic transmission lever and the power window control unit. Otherwise, everything depends on the accuracy of the owner. Some cars with low mileage have an interior that looks as if they were transporting vegetables to the market, while other Pajero from the first years of production are still ostentatious to this day. As for the electrical part, Pajero hardly causes any trouble, even for older cars with obvious off-road use. Mainly affected are generators, radiator fans, drivers and rear door corrugations, and some engine wiring elements and to the transfer case. There are 2 places for batteries, and even the thin interior wiring is done well. Fortunately, it is not produced by the automaker itself, but by a specialized division of Mitsubishi Electric. For some reason, Pajero of recent years of production receives more complaints about door connections and under the hood, and services complain that the wiring and connectors have become simpler and more delicate. However, there are no serious problems with them.